This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello everyone and welcome to another books and baking video. It has been a hot minute and a half since I last filmed one of these videos. Pretty much it's exactly what it says on the tin. I talk about books while baking something. So I went out onto Instagram stories and I asked you guys if you wanted me to recommend you a book based on something very, very specific, what would it be? And I gave examples like books for people to read under the age of 9 or books that you want to read in a graveyard in the moonlight surrounded by falling leaves. And you guys came back with a flood of answers. So I'm going to be answering 30 of those today whilst baking chocolate fudge brownies. Now I think I made these during the last books and baking video. If I could just sandbag this, I was planning on putting in more effort than this. I went to the shops last night to go get cinnamon because I was going to be making cinnamon tea cakes. I thought it would be a good one, but I went to Coles and they did not have any cinnamon. I even checked in the non-home brand section. I was willing to splurge and they didn't have cinnamon in the whole shop. So I panicked and then got the easy option, which I knew would work. So we are going to be making some chocolate fudge brownies today. Here are 30 very, very specific reading recommendations. Number 1, a book for someone who has burnout at work. I would recommend There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. This is a book about a woman. I keep going to put my hand on my hip, but there's a little microphone here. This is a book about a woman who is burnt out at work and quits her job and then ends up taking up a bunch of like odd and interesting jobs as she works out what she wants to do. A book for people who love Peaky Blinders. Now this is one of my examples when I asked for specific reading recommendations. I just got up to the end of season 5 and I love it so much. It's such a brilliant TV show, but I will recommend Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. This is a book I read in year 12 and it was brilliant. This is about a gang in the 1920s, I believe, in Brighton. The very young mob boss in this is named Pinky. Unlike Tommy Shelby, he is not lovable, he is not good underneath it all. He's actually a terrible, terrible person. So prepare yourself for that. This is a really good book if you're interested in gangs in England in the early 1900s. You know, the brilliant thing about these brownies, like they are gluten-free. They don't taste gluten-free, they just taste amazing. Creepy, fairy tale-ish fantasy, not House of Hollow. You know me very well because I would have recommended you House of Hollow. So for those of you who want a creepy, fairy tale-ish fantasy and haven't read House of Hollow, then I recommend House of Hollow. This is a brilliant, brilliant YA gothic story. If you have read House of Hollow and don't want to reread it, I'd recommend The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. I know I've recommended this to death, but honestly, it really does have the wonderful creepy fairy tale vibe. Specifically the titular story. It is so creepy and so cool and beautiful and decadent, and it's a retelling of Bluebeard and it's just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I recommend this one. A one-sitting book, so a book you can read in one sitting. I thought I had a physical copy of this book, but I don't think I do. Do I? No, I do. I do. Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This book is brilliant. It's so short. My only criticism for this book is that I really wish it was longer, but it's definitely a book you can read in one sitting. And it's about a woman who looks at the world in a really interesting way. She works in a convenience store, she's in her 30s, and she's sort of battling with the fact that society wants her to become a wife and a mother, to get a real job, to stop working in a convenience store. Looks at her journey of trying to prioritize the thing that she wants and the way that she wants to live in the world. She's always like watching other people to see how she can be normal like them. I really think it's an interesting protagonist and definitely a book you can read in one sitting. I'm actually out of breath running back and forth. Gee whiz. Okay, eggs and melted butter. So we need to melt the butter. Best audiobook to listen to while working, I would recommend to you Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval Noah Harari did an amazing job at depicting the entire history of the human race in the most interesting way possible, and it really helped with my understanding of the human species and how we got to where we are. I just think it's such a brilliantly done non-fiction book. Before we jump into the next book in this rapid reading recommendations video, I just wanted to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is a website builder which allows people to create beautiful and dynamic websites. You guys all know by now that my website was designed with Squarespace, and I am continually in awe of how much I love it. Squarespace is affordable, it's easy to use, and it has a boatload of benefits, from its enormous library of templates to its powerful analytics tools. And I especially love how easy it was to set up my shop and to use Squarespace's e-commerce features. If you're looking to make a website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ChristyAnnJones to save 10% off your purchase of a website or domain. Probably not so specific, but how to process moving from a home where you've lived forever. That is very specific. I would recommend to you The Stationery Shop of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This is a really good historical novel, and during the story, the main character, Roya, does actually have to make a significant move. I also really love this book because I love the way that food is depicted in this book. It all sounds so very delicious, so I'd recommend that one to you. But also, I'm currently reading The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which has another really significant move. Person who was living in New York, and I won't give away spoilers, but ends up moving somewhere very, very different. I'm only halfway through that book, so I can't speak to the ending of the story, but I'm really, really enjoying it so far. A book for people who love memoirs, Educated by Tara Westover. I recommended this book so very much, but I love it to absolute bits. About Tara Westover's life and her childhood and what it was like growing up in a really conservative Mormon family who didn't let her go to school, and how she sort of had to get out of this very, very controlling home situation. She's never even been to high school or elementary school, and yet she ends up going to an elite university. She does all this amazing stuff. She was so resourceful, and I just think it's such an inspiring, brilliant story. Oh shit, was it supposed to? Oh god, I thought for a second I thought it was only supposed to be one egg, and then I was like, oh no. Mix that in. A book for people whose favorite book is Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. I've only just finished reading Letters to a Young Poet. I thought it was really beautiful, but for you I would recommend Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. The tone of the book is quite similar, and this one is also about the nature of writing, and so I think it's a really good comparison, although this one does look at writing and gender and how a person needs a room of their own or space of their own in order to write and be creative. Classic books that are interesting and easy to read. This is not mixing very well. Classic books. I would recommend to you The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien or J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. Will warn you, some problematic stuff in here, but if you can get past the problematic, very outdated stuff, it's a really beautiful magical story. The Hobbit, of course, is absolutely brilliant. That was an ordeal. Let's baking paper this guy up. This one might actually be a little bit too big. This is a lasagna dish. Okay, well, we're gonna have some thin brownies in here. Right, so what I've done is I've basically just put the brownies on only one side because the sizing is a little bit off. Bake for 35 minutes. A book that isn't a romance novel but features a beautiful love story. I have a good one, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This might not seem like a super obvious pick, but Anne and Gilbert are like my favorite, my absolute favorite. I love them so much. It's not really as prominent in the first book, but if you read the rest of the books in the series, and I did read the rest of the books in the series, their journey together is absolutely beautiful, and I love Gilbert Blythe to absolute pieces. He's such a sweetheart. Definitely this one. Adult fantasy for someone who only likes children's fantasy. I would recommend to you The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So when you say you only like children's fantasy, I take that as you don't really like, you know, adult themes and gore and violence and that sort of thing, which does happen a bit more in adult fantasy. This book, however, I think is really good for someone who wants something that's not really got any of those harsh themes. This is a coming of age story. It's about this, you know, very, very powerful wizard whose name is Quoth, who is telling the story of his life, and it speaks about his time like learning to become a wizard at the magical academy, and we see him in the belly of this like enormous magical city, and the story is beautifully, brilliantly written. To satisfy the autumn witchy vibes, I'd recommend to you The Familiars by Stacey Halls, which is a story about the hangings of the Pendle witches. This is more of a realistic witchy story, so don't expect heaps and heaps of magic to it, but it's a really good book to read during the autumn. A perfect book to read in an English cottage covered with ivy and a pot of tea on a rainy day. I'd recommend to you The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. This book is set in England. There's also a bit in the book where they go to this cottage and it's like very rainy, and I think it very much fits the vibe you're looking for. The Dictionary of Lost Words is about a young woman who is the daughter of one of the men who worked on the Oxford English Dictionary, and so this looks at the process of making the Oxford English Dictionary, and so from that perspective this book was really interesting. A quiet, meaningful book set in everyday life. So I've recommended this one to death. I'm sorry if you've watched a lot of my recommendations videos before, however I'm going to recommend it anyway, and that is The Forest of Wool and Steel by Natsu Miyashita. It's about a man who wants to become a piano tuner, and the story is literally just about that journey. It's set in Hokkaido, it's very snowy and beautiful, and it's about his relationships that he forms with the community as he tunes their pianos. For people who crave magic and happily ever afters, The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is another good autumn witchy story. It's a very whimsical, wholesome story. So if you want a witchy book that's just really, really nice and, you know, magical, and it's going to make you feel warm and cozy on the inside, I definitely recommend this book. A book that is beautiful and makes you cry. I could recommend Pachinko for this one because I love it so much. It's beautifully written and it made me cry so very much, but I've recommended this book so many times that I'm going to also recommend a second book, and that is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. The writing style between these two books is really quite different. This is a very realistic, concrete style. This one, however, is a lot more flowery. This particular book is told from the perspectives of two protagonists. It's non-chronological, and it's also a very fragmentary story. And so it's chopped up into little bits, and we sort of go back and forth between these little bits, and there's all these wonderful moments of imagery that are really, really beautiful. And it also made me cry quite a bit as well. A book about magical doors for those who love House of Hollow and Wayward Children. I would recommend Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is a YA fantasy novel set in Prague. It's beautiful and gothic. It's about a girl whose name is Karu, and she is the adoptive daughter of this sort of monstrous creature who collects teeth, and the magical power that they have is that they can create doors, which are actually portals, and they can sort of walk through to different places in the world. A book that's bizarre but weirdly good. I will recommend to you The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. Definitely a bizarre book, although absolutely brilliant. And I think another good one that can fit into this is The Night Circus by Angela Carter, which is about a young woman whose name is Feathers, who has wings. She's born with wings coming out of her back. It's this like weird kind of fairy tale-esque story about this young woman who joins the circus and her like amazing adventures and her life, and it's gothic and creepy and beautiful and quite weird as well in many different places. Like the story takes some unexpected turns, and it's a very good one. A book to get you out of a reading slump. Given that I just filmed a whole video about this, I will say The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, a book for biology lovers. So for this one, I hope marine biology is okay. I hope rather than just having biology, if we can make a little deviation into marine biology, I want to recommend Julia and the Shark by Kieran Millward Hargrave. The mother in this story is a marine biologist, and she's looking for this specific Greenland shark, this very, very old shark. It's a beautiful, beautiful middle grade story that I really loved. If you like the ocean, if you like fish, if you like marine biology, hopefully also if you like biology, you'll like this book. The best fairy book ever. This is an obvious answer, I think, if you've watched a lot of my videos. My favorite book with fairies in it, and that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, a book that deals with death in a unique way. So the first book I want to recommend for that is a book I've recommended too much, which is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. It's about a boy who's raised in a graveyard. It's so brilliantly done, but because this one's a bit of a cop-out, I've recommended it too much. I would recommend to you 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I also really love the way that death was done in the story. This is a magical realism story set over the course of 100 years about this very interesting family, and I won't get into spoilery territory, but it does look at death in a really interesting way. There was also someone who said best book originally in Spanish. This would also fall into that category for me. Can't see the brownies because the baking paper is just covering them. So remember how I put them on the left hand side? It seems like they have just oozed all the way over I figured there would be some movement, but I wasn't sure if it was going to go the whole way. A book for people who love spring and cherry blossoms. I have a perfect one. Sweet Bean Paste by Dorian Sukagawa. A significant portion of this story is set during sakura season. There's a lot of really beautiful imagery about the sakura in this book as well, so definitely recommend this one if you like cherry blossoms. And if you want to have a story that's beautiful, set in everyday life, but has a really significant emotional undercurrent to it and will teach you a little bit more about history, I really, really recommend this book. A book for fantasy-loving lesbians. I have a really good one for this as well. I feel like this is a really obvious one, but I'm going to recommend to you The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. There's a really good love story between two women in this book that I very, very much appreciate. Epic fantasy, this beautiful story, which has absolutely spectacular world building. A self-help book. Now there's a couple different ways you could go with this one. The most helpful self-help book I've probably read is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which is about negotiation and communication. Really, really helpful if you're working in a professional work environment. However, a book I loved much more, which isn't strictly a self-help book, but could be a self-help book, is called What Happened to You, and it's by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry. The reason why it's kind of a self-help book is because it is a book that's fundamentally about trauma, about understanding childhood trauma, and so if you're a person who's been through that, this can be very, very helpful to you. However, if you haven't been through that and you just find psychology interesting, it's also a really good book for that. And so I love this book to pieces. I thought it was so brilliantly done. For people who love The Secret History, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I retain that even though this book is speculative, it is the most similar to The Secret History that I've read in terms of the vibe and the tone. A book for someone who wants to get into Greek mythology. Okay, so I have 1,000. I have so many, and I'm thinking of making a dedicated video of all of my Greek mythology, or even possibly all of my mythology recommendations, because I've spent a lot of my life on this topic. But really, really quickly, just so I can help you with this one, Stephen Fry's mythology series. If you've never ever read the original text and you're interested in the original texts, you want to read mythos if you want to hear about the gods, you want to read heroes if you want to hear about the Greek heroes. His writing style is really good and engaging and accessible. If you just want a novel which is a retelling of a Greek myth, then I'd recommend to you The Song of Achilles, his sort of coming of age, and also the story of Patroclus as well. Oh, they've risen quite a bit, so that's okay. A book set in Australia or New Zealand, I would recommend to you The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. It's about a young woman whose parents die when she's very young, and she goes to live on a flower farm in country Queensland, I think it is, with her grandmother, and she learns how to translate her trauma with the language of flowers. A book that makes you believe in the forest spirits. Onibi, Diary of a Yokai Ghost Hunter, which is a graphic novel written by a French couple, I believe, who've spent a lot of time in country and rural Japan. I love the art style of this so very much. Ta-da! All finished. Let's cut a piece of this and I can tell you the last book. Oh jeez. Oh no, it's crumbling. That is so good. Honestly, even if you're not gluten-free, if you're in Australia, I recommend this brownie mix so much. It's really good. Book to read if you want to be cozy on a rainy day. My favorite cozy book, aside from rereading Harry Potter, Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is such a beautiful story. It's a book about this young girl named Lyra who lives in this world where people have demons. Demons are an extension of the person's soul. This girl's best friend Roger goes missing, and she essentially goes on this whole adventure to the north. And that was the very last book. That was book number that was, I suppose technically, because we had doubled up on some, this is probably 31 or 32 reading recommendations. It's probably closer to 35 books, to be honest, but regardless, we're done. Many books were recommended, and I can now sit down and go finish eating this brownie and probably also eat more because it's so good. They're so, so very good. Look at it, I've eaten half of it, so it's not as delectable looking now, but it's just absolutely excellent. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so, so very much for watching, and also an enormous thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting my channel. Over there we have bonus videos, writing updates, our book club, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you're interested in checking that out, there's a link in the description down below. Take care everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.